So today's agenda will be to discuss callback functions, their limitations, where they are used, and their alternative. So let us currently go ahead and jump into what callback functions are. A callback function is nothing but a set of instructions that is passed as a parameter to another function. So a callback function is nothing but a set of instructions that is passed as a parameter to another function. And this function will determine when the callback function is executed. So, for example, let us say I have a function called introduce yourself, and this will take a name. And the purpose of this function is to just print the hi, my name is Surya or whatever, and that is the objective. So you will have a function called introduce yourself, and it will take the name and it will take another function as a parameter, and that function can be called log your name because we are just trying to print it in console log. So we can have let name equal to Surya, and we can have a function called log your name, which is gonna do nothing except console.log whatever sentence we are passing to it, it will just log that sentence. Okay, so this is primarily what a callback function is. Your log your name is the callback function. Basically, introduce yourself will be called first, and that will take the function itself as the parameter, and it will decide when to execute this function. So we can jump ahead and see that situation as well. So let's say function introduce yourself. It takes two parameters. One is name, other is a callback function. And the callback function can be named as anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily be callback, but I'm just using that here just to improve the readability of the code. So this callback, this log your name will go and sit at the place of callback, okay? And we can determine when it is called. So let's say if name is not equal to blank, then we will just say we will call callback, and as a parameter for callback, we will pass a variable that is this sentence equal to hi, my name is plus name sentence. So here you can see in console, hi, my name is Surya is getting printed. And how is this code executing? So first, introduce yourself will be called, and it takes the name as Surya and this function definition as the parameter. And when this code is executing, introduce yourself function is executing, that time it determines that, okay, the name is not blank. That means that I can define a sentence using the name, and then I can throw the callback function. And that callback function is nothing but whatever we pass as a parameter. So this is very important to understand. A callback function is nothing but a function that is passed as a parameter for another function. Okay, so here, as you can see, we are calling this only when a name is not blank. So what happens when name is blank? We will have to throw an error, right? So else, let's pass another function here for handling the error scenario. Error. And this function, we'll define it here, function error console.log. Please enter a name. Else So let's test it out. Making Surya blank, name is blank. So now please enter name is being printed in the console. So here in this case, what we're doing is passing two callbacks. And these two callbacks will be executed according to the logic of introduce yourself. So either both can be executed or only one can be executed. That all depends on how we define the parent function. Okay. So now we will have already been using these callback functions without even realizing it. So for example, let's say set timeout function. If you are not aware of what set timeout function does, a set timeout function is just a browser function that lets us execute any function after a set interval of time. So here, for example, if we take 3000 milliseconds, the second parameter is the time duration in this set timeout function, whereas the first parameter is the function to be executed. So here, let's say console.log, this will be printed after 3 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, this will be printed after 3 seconds. So you can see this. So what is happening here, guys? Set timeout is a function that is taking another function as a parameter. So this we can define it outside as a function x, sorry, function x, and here we can print this console log statement, and we can pass x here, which is also correct. Or we can pass that entirety as an arrow function, which is what we were doing before. So you can define it in the parameter area itself. Okay, so now we saw what callback functions are and how we use it probably every time we code without even realizing it. And second part will be to figure out what are the issues with the callback function. So one major issue is that callback functions introduce callback hell. So what is a callback hell? So when I first heard of the term callback hell, I just assumed that it was an infinite loop, which is I thought that okay, it will be one function calling another function, which is calling the parent function again, return, etc. But it's nothing complicated like that. A callback hell is nothing but a readability problem. It's not a logical problem. It's a readability problem of the code. So let's say that readability problem is a major issue because it causes a lot of delay in debugging the code. We will see it with an example. So, for example, a callback hell usually happens when we are using asynchronous functions in a sequential manner. That is, each function's parameters are dependent on the result of the previous function. Okay. So, for example, let's say we have to open and read a file. So, let's say we have to first download the file. We first have to download the file. Download file, and then we have to open the file, and then we have to read the file, and then we have to close the file. And these are all sequential. That is, we have to first download the file, and then only we'll have the actual file copy to open it. And we have to open the file, only then we'll be able to read the file. And then only after reading the file, we'll be able to close the file. So each of these has to happen sequentially. Okay. So that is where callback hells can be introduced when you're dealing it with a callback. So let's say I will just copy paste the code that I have for this. So here you can see download file is the parent function that takes a callback function here. So that callback function you can see once if it is containing an error, if it is returning an error, then we will display a error message. Otherwise, okay, download is successful. Then now we can open the file. So once open file happens, then the callback for the success scenario will contain error while opening the file and then read file. And after the read file is called, then you will have the close file. And this is all provided that none of the error scenarios are getting executed. Only if the code does not go into any of these error scenarios, only then will we have a proper close file executed. Okay. So this here you can see, as you can see, it's very hard to understand what this code does. If you don't sit and write the code yourself here, just by looking at it, it does not make any sense at a quick glance, right? And also you can see that is why this is called a callback hell. This is also referred to as pyramid of doom, and that name comes from the fact that it just looks like a pyramid here. So that is why this callback hell basically increases the verticality of the code, which is what we try to avoid. Verticality Verticality needs to be avoided because that causes a lot of issue with the readability of the code. So here we are just defining the names of the functions, but these functions will be defined in other places. Let's assume that these are all, each function belongs to a different library. So you will have to go around each library trying to understand where the code is going through, what it is doing, etc. So this increases the chances of human error. And that is one point. Callback hell is a issue of using callbacks. Second is it increases the difficulty in error handling. So each step needs its own error handling. So you can see here for downloading, we have error handling. For opening, we have an error handling, reading, closing. Each of these scenarios needs to be handled in a separate block of code, which increases the code size, which increases the difficulty in the readability, etc. And one more point is, essentially, whenever you're using a callback function, what are you doing? You're basically passing that function to a separate piece of code, and you're hoping that it will call it whenever it is needed accordingly. So let's get back to the old example. So here, so this function calls the callback functions. These two are the callback functions. And let's assume that yourself, this piece of code is not written by us. It's a part of some other developer made this code and they are handling whatever we are passing in their own, according to their own wishes. So what we are doing is we are giving the flow of our program, these set of instructions, we are giving it to some other piece of code and we are hoping that that works out well, which is not something that we are ideally supposed to do. Because let's assume that like you want to be introduced only once, like you want to print the statement, hi, my name is, only once. But since you are giving your piece of code, that is the log your name code to some other code, you don't know how many times that will be executing. Ideally, it's supposed to be happening once. But what if here, instead of calling the callback once, that piece of code has written it in such a way that it calls it twice. So then unnecessarily you will be printing it twice, which is something that was not even your intention. So these are the limitations of callbacks. And to handle this, promises were introduced. These promises, we will be covering it in a separate video. So you can check that out whenever that is up. I will give the link in description. Thanks for watching.